There's a certain kind of silence that only exists in the wide open lands of early America. The kind that stretches for miles. The kind that makes time feel slower, softer, almost like it's breathing. And it was in that silence, sometime in the late 1700s, that a story quietly began. Not the kind written in bold ink across history books, but one that lived between the lines, carried in the wind, and remembered only by a few. Jonathan Hale wasn't a man history ever planned to remember. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a politician. He didn't sign any documents that changed the course of a nation. He was just a mapmaker, a quiet one. The kind who preferred the scratch of charcoal on paper over the sound of conversation. He lived just outside a growing settlement near the Ohio River, where the land still felt uncertain, like it hadn't fully decided what it wanted to become. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, Jonathan would step outside his small wooden cabin and listen. Not for anything in particular, just everything. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the low hum of a world still waking up. It calmed him. And maybe that's why he noticed things other people didn't. One autumn morning, the air felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. Jonathan stood at the edge of a field he'd walked 100 times before, but something about it made him stop. He couldn't explain why. There was no sound, no wind. Even the birds had, as if something had been there long before him. Later that day, Jonathan returned to his work table, spreading out his maps. He'd been working on charting the land west of the settlement, marking rivers, hills, and old native trails that most settlers ignored or misunderstood. But today, his hand hesitated. He stared at a blank section of parchment, a place he hadn't yet explored, a place that suddenly didn't feel empty. Slowly, almost without thinking, he marked a small symbol. Just a circle. Nothing more. He didn't label it, didn't explain it, but something told him that place mattered. Days passed, then weeks. Life in the settlement continued as it always did. People building, trading, arguing, surviving. But Jonathan kept thinking about that spot, that quiet field, that strange stillness, until one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he decided to go back.
was longer than he remembered. Or maybe it just felt that way. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper, and the silence thicker. When he finally reached the field, he stopped.
Because it wasn't empty anymore. There was something there. Not a structure, not exactly. More like a pattern in the grass. Perfectly circular, as if something had pressed into the earth long ago and never fully left. Jonathan stepped closer, slowly, carefully. He knelt down, ran his fingers along the ground. The soil felt warm, which didn't make sense. The air was cool. The sun had already begun to set, but the earth beneath his hand held a quiet heat. He didn't tell anyone, not that night, not the next day, or the day after that, because some things, once spoken out loud, lose their meaning, and Jonathan wasn't ready for that. Instead, he kept mapping, but now, every line he drew seemed to lead back to that circle, as if the land itself was gently pulling him toward it, and far beyond the settlement, beyond what any map of that time could show, something else was beginning to shift, slowly, quietly, like a story, waiting for the right moment to be told.
That night felt unusually still. Not the kind of quiet Jonathan was used to. This was different. It felt like the world itself was waiting. Jonathan didn't sleep much. Inside his small wooden cabin, the fire burned low and steady. Soft shadows moved along the walls, stretching, shifting, almost like they were trying to say something. His thoughts kept drifting back to the circle, to the warmth beneath the soil, and to that feeling that something or someone had noticed him before the sun even began to rise. He was already awake.
Outside, the sky was still dim. A pale blue just beginning to show. The earth was damp, the air cool and quiet. He set out again, but this time he moved differently, slower,
More careful. By the time he reached the field, the first light of morning was spreading gently across the land. And still, something felt off. The circle was still there, but now it had changed.
The grass looked more pressed down. the soil darker, and at the center there was something new, a faint marking, barely visible. Jonathan stepped closer, his eyes adjusting slowly. It looked like a symbol, old, unfamiliar, and yet, strangely, it felt like he had seen it before. A quiet pressure built in his chest. Not fear, something else. A pull. He knelt down again, carefully, and placed his hand against the ground. This time, the warmth was stronger, deeper, and for just a moment he thought he felt something move. He pulled his hand back, slowly stood and stayed still, listening. The forest beyond the field was silent, too silent. And then he saw it, far off between the trees, a shadow, not clear, not fast, but there. Jonathan didn't move, didn't look away. The shadow stayed still. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just his eyes playing tricks. But deep down, he knew he wasn't alone. He stepped back slowly, leaving the field behind, avoiding the tree line completely. On his way back, that feeling stayed with him, like something was watching, but never showing itself. He didn't turn around. Later that afternoon, he sat down at his table again, maps spread out before him. But today, he wasn't just drawing land. He was trying to remember old stories, fragments of things he'd once heard, things people didn't talk about anymore. Maybe this place had always mattered. Maybe something had happened here long ago, something that hadn't fully gone away. That night, while the settlement slept, Jonathan picked up his charcoal again, and around that small circle on his map, he began to draw more markings, ones he didn't fully understand. And yet, his hand didn't stop. It moved as if guided, and far beyond the settlement, deep in lands no map had yet touched, places like that circle began very slowly to awaken. The days that followed felt quieter than before. Not peaceful, just quieter. Jonathan stopped talking as much. Not that he had ever been a talkative man, but now even simple words felt unnecessary. He spent more time alone, long hours at his table, maps spread wide, charcoal in hand. But something had changed. He wasn't deciding where to draw anymore. His hand seemed to know. Lines curved where they hadn't before. Marks appeared without thought. And always they circled back to that one place, the circle. Every path, every shape, every quiet line led there. One afternoon, as the light drifted softly through the window, he noticed something new. The markings he had drawn the night before, they didn't look random anymore. They formed patterns, careful, deliberate patterns. Not maps, not exactly. Something older. Something that didn't belong to him. He leaned back slowly, eyes resting on the paper. And for a brief moment, he felt it again. That quiet presence. Not outside. Closer than that. That evening, the settlement felt different. People still moved about, still worked, still lived their small, ordinary lives, but Jonathan noticed things. Subtle things. A man stopping mid-sentence, as if he had forgotten what he was saying. A woman staring out into the distance for just a little too long. Even the animals seemed restless, not loud, not panicked. Just unsettled. As if something unseen was brushing past them again and again. That night, Jonathan didn't stay inside. He couldn't. Something was pulling him back, not urgently, not forcefully, just steadily, like a quiet tide. He walked the familiar path past the edge of the settlement toward the field. The sky above was clear. Stars scattered wide and soft. But the closer he got, the heavier the air became. When he reached the field, he stopped, because this time there was no doubt. The circle was glowing, not bright, not like fire, but a soft, steady warmth, visible now even in the dark. Jonathan stepped forward, slowly, carefully. The ground beneath his feet felt different, not just warm, alive. He stood at the edge of the circle, breathing slow, listening, and then, very faintly, he heard something. Not a voice, not words, but a sound, deep, low, like something moving far below the earth. He knelt again, this time without hesitation. His hand touched the center, and the moment it did, the sound stopped. Everything stopped. The air, the night, even the distant insects, gone. For one long, quiet moment, there was nothing. And then a memory, but not his. Flashes, faint, unclear, a different time. The same land, but untouched. No cabins, no settlement, only people moving quietly, respectfully, standing around that same circle, not afraid, watching, waiting. Jonathan pulled his hand away suddenly. The world rushed back. Sound, air, night. He stumbled slightly, breathing heavier now, but his eyes stayed fixed on the circle, because now he understood something. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. This place was never empty. It was never forgotten. It had simply been waiting. And now it wasn't waiting anymore. After that night, something changed, but slowly, very slowly. The next morning felt too quiet. The people in the settlement moved as they always did, working, talking, living their small, ordinary lives. But something was missing. Sound. Laughter came less often. Voices stayed low. It was as if, without realizing it, everyone had begun to quiet down. Jonathan stood outside his cabin, watching. He could feel it. This silence wasn't natural. It was spreading. That day, he didn't go back to the field. For the first time, he held himself back. But the pull inside him didn't stop. If anything, it grew stronger. He sat at his table, maps laid out before him. The circle no longer felt small. It felt central, like everything was connected to it. He slowly reached out, his finger resting on the circle drawn in charcoal, and the moment he touched it, something shifted. Images, clearer this time, long ago, the same land, but untouched. No cabins, no settlement, only open earth and quiet wind. And around that same circle, people, standing still, their faces calm, no fear, only respect and patience. An older man stepped forward. He carried something in his hands, soil or ash. He let it fall gently into the center of the circle, and the others closed their eyes, as if listening, as if feeling something deep beneath them. Jonathan's chest tightened. This wasn't imagination. It was memory. Not his, the land's. And then a quiet understanding began to form. This place was never just a place. It was a doorway between times, between worlds, and the people who had once stood there, they had known. They had understood how to listen. Jonathan pulled his hand back, his breathing unsteady now. But his eyes, clear. There was no fear in them, only understanding. That evening, he stepped outside again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Off in the distance, another man stood. One of the settlers, quiet, still, looking toward the field. Jonathan stopped. The man spoke softly. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" Jonathan didn't answer. He didn't need to. "I went there last night," the man continued. His voice wasn't afraid, but it wasn't steady either. "It's changing." They stood in silence for a while. Then, the man slowly stepped back, as if unsure how close he should be. Jonathan turned his gaze back to the field. The sun was setting now, light fading gently, and in that moment, he saw it. The circle was no longer alone. Farther out, another one, faint, and beyond that, another, even farther, as if across the land itself, a pattern was forming, wide, silent, ancient. Something was waking up. Jonathan stood there completely still, because now he knew this was only the beginning. After that evening, Jonathan was no longer the same. Everything now felt clearer. The silence didn't feel strange anymore. It felt meaningful, as if something was being said within it. He drew less now, because he no longer needed to. He knew where the circles were. It felt like the land itself was reminding him. Over the next few days, he began walking farther from the settlement. Not just one, but two, then three. He found more circles, each one different, but connected. In some places, the ground was warm, in others cold, and in some completely still. One day, he stood inside a circle that felt different from the rest. It was smaller, but deeper. He closed his eyes, and this time he didn't try to see anything. He only listened. After a while, he felt it, a rhythm, slow, deep, as if the earth itself was breathing, and in that moment he understood. These circles were not separate. They were part of something larger, as if the land itself was alive, and the circles were its pulse. Suddenly, he remembered the older man from the vision. They hadn't been afraid because they knew this wasn't danger, it was connection to the land, to time itself. And now that connection was opening again. But why now? Jonathan slowly opened his eyes. The world around him was still, calm, but beneath that calm, something was moving. That night, he returned to the settlement, but he wasn't alone anymore. Others had felt it too. A few of them stood quietly, their eyes carrying the same question, the same silence. One of them spoke softly, "I saw it in a dream." Another said, "I heard it." Jonathan didn't speak. He didn't need to. He understood now. This wasn't just his experience anymore. This awakening was spreading. Later that night, when everything had gone quiet, Jonathan opened his map again. But this time, he didn't draw anything new. He simply looked at all the circles together. And then he saw it. This wasn't just a pattern. It was a signal. Something rising from beneath the land. An old call. One that had been heard before, long ago. And now, once again, someone was beginning to hear it. Jonathan slowly closed his eyes, because now he knew this wouldn't stop. It had only just begun. After that night, nothing was quite the same, and yet nothing changed all at once. Everything shifted slowly, so slowly it almost felt like time itself had softened. Jonathan was no longer searching, he was waiting, because now he understood whatever was coming would come on its own. Over the next few days, more people began to dream. The same kind of dreams. Circles, the land, and a sound not heard but felt. No one was afraid. Strangely, everyone felt calm, as if this had always been inside them. One morning, without a word, the entire settlement began to move. No one called for it, no one gave direction, and still everyone knew where to go. Jonathan walked with them, silent, because this time there was nothing to explain. They arrived at the open field, the place where it had first begun, but now it wasn't alone. All around, more circles slowly began to appear, the ground itself revealing its marks. One by one, people stepped forward, standing inside the circles. No instructions, and yet everyone stood exactly where they needed to be. Then the silence deepened. Jonathan closed his eyes. This time, he didn't search, he let go. And in that stillness, he understood. This call was not a warning, It was a reminder of where people came from and what they belonged to. The land was not just land, it was memory, it was time, it was alive, and people were never separate from it. They were part of it. In that moment, all the circles softly began to glow. No harsh light, no sound, just a feeling, deep, calm, as if everything was breathing together. And then slowly it faded. The glow disappeared. The circles sank back into the earth. The field returned to stillness. People opened their eyes. No one spoke, because nothing needed to be said. It wasn't an ending. It was something being restored. A connection that had once been lost and now had quietly returned. After that day, Jonathan never drew another map, because now he didn't need one. He knew where everything was, and more than that, he knew where he belonged. The plains grew quiet again, just like before. But those who had felt it, those who had listened, they understood. The silence was never empty. It was full, filled with something old, something quiet, something still breathing.